Going live. So welcome to Teachers Teaching Teachers. It is November 9th, 2016. And we are gathered here to talk about assessment, to talk about badges, to talk about LRNG. Stephanie West-Puckett has an article out in College English about her work with badges. And Kylie Larson is with us. People will introduce each other as we go. But one of the takes I have on what kind of helps this conversation is that we have a project we're all kind of working on, which we'll describe. It's called Sandboxes for Learning. And there are now, I don't know, 20, 25, maybe 27 teachers in the National Writing Project who are building playlists, XPs, and badges in 4 different sites. And so that's a big project. But then a lot of us have been thinking about badges for a long time and how they work and assessment. And so it felt like a nice thing to bring us all together. Christina Cantrill is with us as well. And Trixie Smith, Kristina from the National Writing Project. Trixie Smith is the director of the Cedar Writing Project, where there are, I don't know, 7 teachers there working on this work. And every time I look, they're such busy people up there. I don't know how you guys do it. Anyway, and Jo Paraiso is with us. She's coordinating the group from Oakland, and Sloan is coordinating a distributed digital online group that's doing lots of work within there too. But so that's my briefest introduction. Kylie, do you want to introduce yourself, and then we'll go around and have everybody introduce themselves, just kind of briefly what you do these days and your take on our question tonight. Whatever you want.
Sure. Yeah, I'm the
director. Sorry, I just did it. I see everyone is turning their mic off. That's cool, but if you want to leave it on and interrupt, that's good too. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm Kylie Larson. I'm the Director of Learning Content and Research at LRNG. I've been involved in the MacArthur DML world for the last 5 years doing formative evaluation across a multitude of different sites. So I have background in creating content in informal spaces that's grounded in connected learning and really looking at how adults can structure learning experiences for kids that are meaningful to their lived experience.
Cool. Tell us what you love about LRNG. Seriously, I mean, if somebody didn't know about it, brief introduction. Yeah.
Sure. What I find most compelling about LRNG is that it's grounded in connected learning, and we're really working hard to make pathways to actual economic, academic, and even civic opportunity more obvious and more transparent, so that kids who might not have access to the kind of mentorship or the kinds of adults who can help them see those pathways forward also have the same kinds of access to opportunity. That may be discovering an after-school program that helps them explore their interests. That may be learning about the steps that it takes to become a graphic designer. That may be learning about the steps that it takes to apply to college. So that's why I'm passionate about the work that I do.
Cool. I actually like that question now. Trixie, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Trixie Smith. I am the director of the Cedar Writing Project, although I've only been in this position for a little over a year. So I've been learning with my fabulous co-directors, and Dawn Reed is one of my co-directors who's really leading this Youth Voices project, but couldn't be with us tonight because she's doing parent conferences. Bad timing for parent conferences, I think.
Yeah, I just sent her notes saying I hope her parents appreciate how lucky they are.
Yes, I agree with that. Okay. And I also direct our writing center, and part of the work that I've been doing is thinking about how the work of the writing project and the writing center intersect, particularly with the outreach programs that we have going at the writing center. We I use the land grant mission of our college to really push for outreach in the community and community composing projects. And so we look for a lot of ways to overlap the writing project and the writing center in the communities, which includes the schools, but also includes a lot of after school and summer programming. So that's kind of where we are right now.
So, we'll ask you to keep this, obviously. But what were your first questions when you heard about this project?
What's a playlist? Was actually my first question. And then it all made sense. I'm really excited about the possibilities of how we're taking the social justice work that we're doing in activist learning work and being able to turn it into curriculum and ways of thinking about getting youth and teachers involved in their communities, whether it's the community of their school or the communities they live in, or even in the state, and across communities with each other as well. Our teachers, I think, are really good about working across schools and across districts. And I think that this has a lot of opportunity for that.
Very cool. And I'm just coming across here. Stephanie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Stephanie West-Puckett. I'm a doctoral student at East Carolina University, where I've also taught writing for about 15 years. I was involved with the early connected learning work with DML, the early LRNG challenge work with pop-up maker spaces in our local high school setting. And I've been working for a while in my own classroom with digital badging, thinking through how to diversify the curriculum, how to encourage students to pursue individualized and collaborative work in the classroom that connects to their interests, with sort of sets of increasingly difficult rhetorical challenges that end in capstone projects that we negotiate together. So the assessment, I'm interested in assessment, particularly alternative assessments and the connection between assessment and social justice. And I guess I should also say I'm Associate Director of the Tar River Writing Project at East Carolina University.
Cool. Thanks for coming tonight. And LinkedIn and all the materials around this I copied your article into Now Comment, an article that people can go and annotate and as when you have time to do that. Jo, you're next across my screen. I don't know how it looks on yours, but welcome. Can't hear you yet. Oh no. Uh-oh. Did we check sound? We didn't check sound for Jo. Jo, you may need to go out and in again. That may solve it. Sorry. Kristina.
Hi. I was trying to tweet out Stephanie's article, so I'll do that. So what am I saying? I'm Christina Cantrill. I work with the National Writing Project. Yeah, I think it's been really fun to sort of say, yeah, what actually is a playlist? Like, I think that's like the right question, Trixie. And that it's sort of I mean, I was really excited to hear like the Red Cedar Writing Projects took this on as like, wait, what is it? Let's do a genre study, you know, like that. I think that's where we are, and we're really trying to figure out what do these things look like? How can they be, you know, what does it take to design them? How do we think about their assessment? How do we support the use in using them? And I feel like we're just in the beginning stages of that now. So really excited about this grant and this opportunity for all the folks to work on it, thinking about stuff like how pop-up maker spaces probably should have some playlists too. So we should talk about that. And then also working with Kylie, we've been doing, a group of teachers from the National Writing Project have been doing some assessments looking at like youth using playlists, and then what are they creating at the end, and thinking about how are some ways to support that process, you know, looking at it from that end of the process. So what you all are designing will also help us sort of develop out thinking about assessment in this space too. So excited about this work.
Thanks for joining us. Jo, is it working? No. So up under settings at the top, there's a little gear. You might need to change where the audio is coming in. I don't know for sure. But you could try going out. I guess some people suggest closing down the computer and opening it again too. Anyway, Chris Sloan.
Hi, my name is Chris Sloan. I teach English and Media, high school English and Media at Judge Memorial in Salt Lake City, Utah. And so with Paul, I've been helping nurture youth voices for a decade or so. And I'm leading, co-facilitating the online cohort of the Youth Voices LRNG group. And so I'm with people who are distributed around the Intermountain West. So I'm in Salt Lake with a colleague. There are 2 colleagues in Denver, and there's a colleague in Montana, and 1 more in Texas. So we're negotiating the online space and creating our playlist there, and just I think having some good times. So I'm interested in the badging thing too, because I've thought about badging for a while and didn't get too far. I understand the concept, but I've got some questions about it.
Which are? Go ahead, keep talking.
Well, like if a student of mine gets a badge, there are a lot of questions like, does it matter who it's from? Like, is it a badge that I got from my teacher? Does that have, weight? Because I'm also involved with, my students do a student reporting lab with PBS NewsHour, and they have some badges. So it's like, that actually seems to me to carry more weight than like if I badged a student, even though it could have the same metadata associated with it. So like questions like that would be one.
What do you have you actually seen those badges used, the PBS NewsHour stuff? Have your kids gotten them?
Yeah, I kind of remember last year, at the end of last year, they got some, but it wasn't a very robust effort on my part. I was kind of like, oh, the year is ending. We ought to actually do this badge thing. So I'm kind of not a model badger.
I always use that badge as an example, though, at least, which is because isn't it true that there's an internship attached to some of those badges at the local station? Do you know about that?
I think there are different pathways to the same badge. So that is one of them, yeah.
Yeah, cool. So I will put out there that there are there are many questions over the years, but 2 things that are sticking with me right now around badges are the way LRNG has them set up is less than or how to make that a collaborative experience with young people in creating badges. And Stephanie's article certainly would argue. And so that's one question I have in all of this. And then the hardest part of the badge, and LRNG just relatively recently requires you to kind of say what the opportunity is going to be and how the kid's going to make that opportunity. That's part of the planning process. And I'm not complaining about it. It's just that's really hard to think about from our perspective. I also wanted to identify, and Kylie, maybe you could say more about this around LRNG, is that one of the things that might be unique about our work is that we're all teachers coming from inside of school, and and a lot of LRNG stuff is out of school work, it seems to me. So that's an interesting thing. So those are 3 areas that are worth thinking about, I think. So let's leave this open for wherever this conversation leads at this point. And I hope Jo can join us again. Go ahead. Kylie, what are you thinking, having heard that introduction?
I mean, I think it's great. One thing that we have to do if we're going to be successful is build more inroads to public educators and to make sure the platform is useful across multiple contexts. That's where the kids are. That's where all the people doing a lot of really great, innovative education work are. So for us, I see Wallet as a really great use case where we can really start figuring out how we can make the platform work in multiple settings and in multiple ways. And Paul, you said that we were requiring opportunities. I don't think we're requiring. I think we're allowing you to say what the opportunity attached to the badge is, but I don't think it's an actual requirement that there is one. We encourage it if it's possible.
I don't think you can save it until you do, but that's okay. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Don't worry.
It matters.
Can I ask a couple of clarifying questions about the playlist? My understanding is a bit fuzzy, but
well, that's perfect because
so it seems to me like what you all are working on is really designing an open-ended curriculum pathways. And then the assessment project, which actually my husband has been working on that, so I've kind of heard from him, what he's been doing there and assessing the student work, is looking at what actually are young people making, what do they want to make, and then how can this open-ended curriculum really support that and provide really flexible structures for the composing that young people want to do. Is that sort of what you guys are thinking, or?
Yes and no. I mean, for me, a playlist is really just a set of learning experiences that are gathered around a common theme. And we try to do that pretty loosely so that you can really kind of take it and make it your own. There's some things that we've learned as we've built some of ours. Some have been more successful, some have been less successful. We're definitely in a constant state of iteration and learning and design. In terms of the assessment work, I feel like maybe buried in what you just said was a disconnect between the playlist and the badge, which I actually think is where we're headed. So we've been doing a lot of thinking around what it looks like to have freestanding badges that are aligned to either 21st century skills or to particular core competencies that maybe employers find really important when they're hiring kids. And then it wouldn't necessarily matter that a particular playlist led to that badge and was attached to it. It'd be more like however you get to these skills, whether that's through several playlists that are kind of knit together or whether that's through skills that you've, garnered or learned in another space. You can like complete a capstone XP that's attached to the freestanding badge, earn that badge, and unlock the opportunity that's attached to it.
Okay, so each of the playlists, the constellation of experiences doesn't lead to a particular badge tied to that playlist. Is that?
They do right now. And that's kind of the model that we started with, was a playlist ends in a badge. And that's kind of the system as it exists currently. And we're rethinking that structure. Because we can imagine a future in which there are unbadged playlists or maybe playlists that unlock just like a participation badge instead of something that's really heavily assessed.
Gotcha.
So.
But Stephanie, it sounds somewhat parallel to your different kinds of badges. I mean, you have project badges and habits of mind badges. Do you want to kind of explain that briefly?
Yeah, so I have the two different badging economies in my composition classroom. The first project that we engage together is a class. Students explore the frameworks for success in post-secondary writing and other framing documents like the Writing Program Administrator's outcome statements. And through that work, they form small groups, and each of the groups really explores in depth one particular habit of mind. So creativity or curiosity or flexibility or metacognition. There are 8 of those. And then those students work to remediate the language and remediate the framing documents into a particular badge. So each group will design its own badge. They'll choose their graphics. They'll choose their criteria for how their classmates can earn the badge. So we talk a lot about evidence. We talk a lot about criteria. We talk a lot about the construct that they're forwarding. So what do they mean? What do we mean by creativity? What do you mean? How do you communicate this to your peers?
And by the way, Stephanie, could I interrupt
Sure.
to say that? I mean, some of my thinking around that is how different that looks with younger students, right? You can't go with all those kind of heavier documents or more difficult documents to read with younger students. So that's worth thinking about. But
Yeah, well, they're difficult for college students, particularly first-year college students. And so that's really the point of the process of this project, of the first badge, is to demystify some of that jargon, some of that language that, we, our teachers, these documents were written for writing teachers. And so what does this mean for students? And so we do a lot of talking and processing and trying to figure out, what does this mean and what does it look like in practice from other students? And so the students design guides for their badges, and then the rest of the semester, they're the experts on that particular habit of mind, and they assess their peers' work throughout the semester, looking for demonstration of the habit of mind. So we're not looking for mastery. We make a big deal about you don't master creativity. This isn't outcomes, it's intentions. And the rest of the semester, students are submitting work that they're composing for my sort of project badges. So that economy is student driven. Students design the badges, students award the badges, and I'm always peeking in, I'm always kind of overseeing, but they are the designers and the awarders and the earners, and I'm just sort of an overseer, I guess, in that point. The other badging economy is more similar to, I think, the first instantiation of the playlist, in which I design project badges. Students work through, they get a choice of 8 to 10 different projects, and they choose which projects they'll work on, when they'll work on them, everything from social justice badges to science communication badges. And they work through the different levels of those badges and submit those badges to me. And that's more of what we would call the heavy assessment, where I'm looking for the course learning goals and outcomes in that work.
Is there an overlap between the badges, Steph? Like those economies, do they?
Yeah, well, because we are in a classroom setting, these do boil down to, unfortunately, a grade, right?
Right.
I guess fortunately, unfortunately, we could go around about that, but because we are in the classroom setting, so students are required to earn all 8 of the Habits of Mind badges to pass the course. So they have to get their peers badges, and that engages them in reading each other's work and thinking about assessment, and really starting to understand what these look like in all of their wonderful diversity, right? Because the way that I show creativity is going to be very different than the way someone else demonstrates it. So I love that part about the diversity of approaching these terms, because I think these, the outcomes and particularly outcome statements can sometimes be very narrowly interpreted. But the project badges, then students will choose how many they want to work on based on the grade that they want to get in the class. So if they decide to do four badges, then that would equate to an A, 3 for a B, 2 for a C, 1 for a D. And so, they're working through the open-ended curriculum of the project badges, and then that's the work that they are submitting to their peers. So it's the work that they're producing in the class. But I do have quite a few students, particularly this semester, who say, you know what, I really use persistence in this biology report that I had to do. I thought I would never do it. I really want to argue that what I did over here in this other context in this other class is really my best example of persistence. So, and we're open for that. We talk about that with the groups, and, does composing only happen in your English 1100 class, and where all the lovely places it happens across the curriculum, in school and out of school, and how can we have structures where we can bring all of that learning in and across contexts and across networks.
Jump in, folks. Don't. Kylie, you're shaking your head. What's all that make you think? What is it thinking about?
Oh, yeah. I actually was just making a note that I need to talk to Stephanie about how she approaches peer-based assessment. Because one of the things we've been thinking about is how we can incorporate that into the platform and what that might look like. And so I feel like there's a lot we can learn from you. I see Kristina's happy about that too. Well, I think it's really important, right? Because it helps kids learn, I hate to say kids, it helps teens learn their skills, and it helps them learn them better when they can practice them and see them in action, and they know how to identify them and how to coach someone on becoming better. So we see this pretty foundational.
I was just thinking that a few of us have used P2P use peer badges. I think you use those a bit too, right, Steph, at some point. And those are really nicely designed badges. Like, I found them useful in my class because you could the badge earner gets the badge, and then, I mean, the badge maker can give the badge to someone, and then that badge earner can also give the badge once they earn it. So that's an interesting design too, which sort of, I think, starts to build communities of practice in a way. It's like those are all the people with those badges, and it has the potential for that anyway. I'm not sure. I didn't take it far enough to really see that, but I could have just imagined.
I don't know if anybody has, but yeah.
Yeah. And I know that the folks who have the DML competition who are doing the music work have done a lot of work with peer badging in that way. So, and they might actually have more robust examples of like how communities of practice can really develop around these things, because then you have this shared work you're doing together and sort of shared language around that work. So.
Well, and I, again, Stephanie's article reminded me of how important it is to do the process around the artifact, right? Because the badge and the language around the badge means something to somebody, means something else to somebody else, and then it's in that dialogue that really important.
Well, she said make the argument, right? Like the one student's making the argument for the badge, like this is where I show persistence. That's like a whole nother act, right?
And what I also like to always point out is that the assessment process teaches the assessor as much as it does the student, right? So it tells you what's happening with your curriculum. It tells you how to teach better next time, and you know, it changes your environment.
Good assessment does that, yes.
Well, that's all we're doing.
That's right. But it is a dirty word. I mean, when I tell my colleagues I do work in assessment, you know, usually I get the oh face. You know, that's something we have to do. You know, we're required now, all these mandates to do this and do that. And what if we didn't look at it as a mandate? What if we didn't victimize, you know, assessment culture? And what if we thought about how we could create social justice through assessment? And you know, that's the point of the college English issue is thinking through assessment and how it can hinder or help our efforts to create more just and equitable societies.
Trixie, you want to jump in with anything?
I guess the question that is still circling around for me is what the students at various levels in particular really do with the badges. Because, I mean, I've been doing collaborative.
Well, in Stephanie's class and in my class, they get a credit or a grade, right? which is why I brought up the opportunities thing, because I think that's a hard thing for us to get our head around. But go ahead.
Well, I understand the grade part, but I'm thinking about what its value is outside of that or beyond that, because I mean, a badge is just one system of recognizing the work, right? I mean, there have been certainly other systems we've used over time. I'm not anti-badge. I'm just trying to figure out its purpose as opposed to some other way of assessing. Part of it, I think, is because I'm not a gamer, and it's not part of my culture. And so, I mean, because there's been some talk at our university about more kind of university-wide badge systems and what that might do or not do. And it seems like it kind of died in the water. It kind of died in this discussion point because people didn't really jump on it the way some of them thought we should. But I think it's still there. I think it's still floating around. And so I'm trying to see, you know, what they were after or where we would fit into that.
Yeah, I was wondering that question too, Trixie. So the past couple of semesters I've surveyed my students, and one of the questions I ask on the survey is have you or do you plan to show a badge to anyone outside of this classroom, who and why? And over 40% of students say yes, that I've used it to talk about the things that I do in this class, to talk to other students, to say this is the kind of work we do. I've talked to my parents. I got my mom and dad quite a bit. I've shared it with my mom and dad. I'm still continuously amazed with students who share these things with their parents, even though they're at college, and it becomes, I think, a talkative boundary object, an object that we talk around, that we can try to say, what does this mean? Because it doesn't necessarily have a meaning from one context to the other, right? That has to be cultured, right, and discussed and negotiated, I think.
One of the things I like about digital badging is all the metadata that's attached. And so we're building out, I think one of the more exciting pieces is thinking about digital portfolios and how all of this can come together in a way that really showcases youth work, so that the badge is not just a badge, but it's also attached to the actual product that was created. So we're doing some work there.
So can you say more? What's that going to look like?
Well, it's actually designed out, should be built out hopefully in Q1 or Q2, so you all should be able to play with it soon.
And what's that mean?
Oh, sorry.
Don't make us think about that.
Yeah, forgive me.
Okay.
I've become enculturated. I don't even know that I do it anymore. So January, February, March-ish.
Okay.
Actually, I could probably find out for us right now if I needed to, the exact date. But
that's good.
So the idea is that teens will actually be able to customize their digital portfolios, decide what work they'd like to showcase depending on what audience they'd like to share it with, and then they'll have a dedicated URL that they can send out. So let's say you've got a teen who's really into illustration and has done a bunch of work through LRNG or through stuff that they're doing in their offline life. They want to capture all of that, import it as products into their portfolio, then they could have it as a dedicated link to share out on LinkedIn or to send to colleges as evidence of the work that they've been doing. There'll also be space potentially for comments from mentors, from folks who have worked with them on these projects, to say, hey, here are the qualities that I saw in this student that developed over the course of this particular project.
That's the part I love, because then the work and the assessments are tied together. They're not divorced. And so the labor and the collaborative labor, like when you mentioned comments from mentors, so the comments that I leave on my students' work, the comments that they get in peer review, and all of that is attached. And so, I don't know who's got the time and who might be going through and looking at all that, but it's there if you want to. And so to me, it kind of, it honors the labor of composing, and it doesn't divorce that labor from an assessment, which makes me happy.
There's also interesting work. I've been on the Open Portfolio, the working group of the Open Portfolios project that Maker Education has been working on, and they've gotten into this interesting space, which would be, which is true whether it's online or not, but it's around documentation. Like, how do you actually even capture the work that you're doing, right? So whether it's process work or it's an end product or whatever, and both as a means of sharing it as evidence or making the argument that you were saying, Stephanie, or doing some sort of reflective piece for your own, look back at the work you've been doing and how you've been growing or whatever. So a lot of that work's been developed. And then what's exciting, though, in a digital sort of platform like this is that all can also be tied or considered in connected ways.
So I have an urge to kind of be very concrete. in terms of these playlists that my colleagues and I are building, and so first question people ask is, where do you start? Do you start with the badge? Do you start with the playlist? Do you start with the XP? So I usually say, and correct me or whatever. Why don't you start with an XP? Maybe if you want to start with the playlist, you can start there too. But mess around with that interaction for a while. So people are doing that over, for a week, 2 weeks. And then they look and they say, oh, I got to make a badge too. Right? And here's the other kind of concrete thing that I'll admit, having recommended to some of my colleagues. Titling the playlist and the badge almost the same, which really identifies what kind of badge it is when you do that, right? And my thinking in that it comes from working with students in that it becomes very clear to them, and what is this thing I'm doing? But it makes it a pretty small chunk of the curriculum, right? The playlist into the badge, 3 to 5 XPs, you know, and then I get the badge. So I just wanted to go back again to the different kinds of badges that you were talking about, because it's been clear to us that we need the badges to be happening pretty quick for young people. They need to see that they get the reward, you know, that they know where it starts and ends pretty fast. But then those aren't meaningful enough in terms of the habits that you all have been talking about. And it seemed to me, and I'll finish with this, it seemed to me that it's okay for us to design those badges, you know, the designers of the curriculum to design those ones, but that the habit ones, I want to co-design with young people more. So I just wanted to ask if that's making any sense. Is that too much to say in one chunk? Sorry.
Well, I had a question about,
go ahead.
Because, you know, I deal with high school students, and I really like the idea of developing the criteria with them. And then, but there's this force in high school, you know, this need to belong to the group. And, you know, like I see it happen a lot, like they do help each other constructively a lot, but then there's this time where it's just like, you're okay, I'm okay. You know, that's, you know, they hit a wall, and I don't know if this is too pedestrian of a question, but, you know, like, how do you deal with that, that need to, you know, to love one another, or, you know, like that they conflate that with work? Or do you see that, Stephanie, with your college students?
Do you mean just approving without reviewing evidence, or is that what you're getting at?
Yeah,
like,
well, they'll review evidence, and they'll do it pretty, you know, pretty constructively. But there comes a time, I think, when they're just like, yeah, this is, I don't know, this is good enough. Does that ever happen?
yeah, I mean, I think it happens in my life all the time. There, you know, sometimes it's just good enough, and that's it, right?
Well, one, it's maybe not quite good enough.
Yeah. Yeah, there are times when their assessments differ from my assessments, and I note that. I don't change anything, but I note it. I said, you know what, I probably would have asked you to resubmit. I would have said, I'm not convinced, and here's why. And we talk about that kind of thing. And again, that's the point, is for us to negotiate expectations, to negotiate our values, and to negotiate what we mean when we talk about good writing.
So that your instructor standards and opinions are in that conversation too.
Absolutely, and they're different than students. But we talk a lot about audience and context and who you're writing for, and a lot of times they're writing for each other, and they're composing for one another. And so I've got to take seriously, you know, their responses as audience members, right? And the values they're bringing to this situation, which in this context, which may be different from my own. They tend to value humor and pleasure more than I do at times. You know, the silliness, and I've made a place for that in the badges and the work, and that's because students tend to still value that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's hard agreements, right? We're never gonna, I don't want us to norm completely, right? That's the difference. I'm not looking for inter-rater reliability, or for us to completely norm and to have one way of reading anybody's work. I want them to see a diversity of responses of real readers, and to come to some really hard agreements about that, and to respect our diversity as writers and readers, and the multiple ways we read, write, and make meaning together.
Do you do like anonymous feedback too, or is it always known to each other?
We're using Google. So my students, our badging platform, we use Credly, and they put links to their Google Doc folders. And so those, it's not anonymous. Their profiles are tagged to that. And encourage that because I want students to be able to ask each other questions, to know who's leaving feedback and response. So I really don't have any anonymous opportunities for assessment.
So I don't know how to bring this up, but the I think attached to the question of how, I don't know, good, how deep, how wonderful the work is, right, is also a question of that I said earlier, that many of us working on this project are teachers and coming out of a school context, but we're imagining doing this work in an out-of-school context. Many, we're setting up out-of-school programs in the spring around this work. So how do we keep young people involved, interested in work, yet have them go deep also? I mean, and I just wanted to ask Kylie if you could kind of break out, how does LRNG have a perspective on that? Do you have a perspective on that? Like, how do you get kids to do deep, interesting work if they're not getting a grade for it at the end?
Sure. So, I mean, because we're so grounded in connected learning, we rely heavily on them pursuing their own passions and finding their own interest. I hate to use the word passions because a lot of teens find that really daunting, right? Passion feels like something you really know that you love, whereas interest feels a little more like free to explore and not really be sure. But yeah, the idea is you offer up a multitude of content, and hopefully you can provide enough teasers that they find the thing that they're interested in and will be willing to follow you down that rabbit hole, because you know what happens when a kid finds something that they're really into. I mean, there's almost nothing you can do to stop them, especially if you can kind of make it feel like game-like learning where they're getting the things just in time as they need them. So they're building those skills, you're watching them learn and grow, but they're doing it purely out of motivation to learn more about the thing.
Mm-hmm. Chris, do you think there's anything in an issue with us learning about this, or?
Say that again.
Yeah. Do you feel this question at all, or, as you're developing your playlist, like how it's different from developing curriculum for a classroom?
Well, yeah, the group I'm working with is these kids self-organized, and they wanted to have a photography club at the school, and I was at after-school club, and I was like, oh my God, I'm already busy enough. But they were just, the one girl behind it is really just like, I want to do it. So they're doing it, and so now I guess I'm thinking about it a little bit differently than like how I normally do curriculum, because so photography, I'm trying to make it manageable. Like, what's something that is useful, that it's transferable skills. So I was like, all right, good portraits. They're hard to come by. And the kids want to know. So at the first meeting, the leader said, like, what do you guys want to do? And so like light painting is one, night photography, portraits are the big ones, And so I think portraits are, like good portraits are a marketable skill, because like you can use them for headshots or, for a lot of different things. So
could I just emphasize what I think you just heard you say? I mean, first of all, there's a process where you went to the kids and said, what do you want to do? That's really interesting.
They went to each other and just said it without me, actually.
Right, but I'm just saying that would be a good process to mark that others could do too if they haven't done that yet. But and then you pick something that you said is hard to do, but that they want to do. Right?
Well, that people do it, but people take portraits a lot of each other, and there's a lot of mediocre portraits out there. And so I think there are, and I've seen this before with this media students I've had, like they get little jobs from
and that's the other thing on, and then it gets
senior portraits, like you can have a professional do it, or like these kids actually wind up doing portraits of their friends and making a few dollars. It's not much. And sometimes they connect with professionals. So like being more cognizant of those, I forget the word that we've been using for it, like opportunities maybe is the word. We had an open house tonight. I'm just at the tail end of it. So I think more cognizant of the connections to professionals, instead of just like in my classroom, it'd be like, let's do this thing, let's show it, you got credit, and hope that those things happen, but not really foster them, like the connections part of things.
Trixie, I see you shaking your head. Do you want to jump in on anything?
Oh, and I could add one more thing too. I think there's a sense of like, what I also see is like, what we photograph is important too. Like there should be this like, choose something that you think is important, someone that matters to you, and take their portrait. I think is an added layer I want to have them think about, because maybe a sense of agency there. I don't know, working on it. Sorry.
So Chris, keep talking. Have you gotten, so that's a pretty good description of where you're going with your playlist. What have you thought about what the badge is going to look like and what's going to be in it?
For
the portrait. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I have lots of really stunning portraits that kids have taken. So like, that could be like that image could be like literally what the badge looks like, or what the metadata.
Yeah, all of that. Like what's going to be attached to it? Have you?
Well, I mean, I had a question about how consistent badges should be. Like in Youth Voices, should there be a Youth Voices badge that everyone gives and has different text on it? Because then everybody doesn't have to make their own badge, although I'm sure it would be really interesting for everyone to make their own badge. So there's that, but then like the metadata that goes with it is, like, do you know how to use aperture? How's your depth of field? So there's some technical stuff that, they need to know as far as the badge goes. That's where I am with the badge.
So just to say, Kylie, that's an issue that has been coming up. One of the issues that Chris mentioned there has been coming up with the Michigan group and with the online group at least. And we do have a template that is a Youth Voices template. Earlier on, just to say, we tried to think about whether or not it could be an NWP badge, thinking that would count more in some way. So, and then the Michigan people said, we want to make our own. We want them to look better. We want them to represent what the work is, from the playlist. So any guidance on those questions? Or what have the other people done? You're muted, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think you all are in a unique situation because it's such a distributed group of folks working under a united umbrella. Mm-hmm. That I don't really know if I have guidance for you. I think it's something you just kind of have to hash out internally. I don't think there's really a right or a wrong way to approach it. It really is.
But what are the advantages of both?
Well, I think the advantages that we have seen is that sometimes badges that have recognizable companies and or nonprofit organizations on them are more highly coveted or tend to be clicked on more by kids because there's kind of an association between the badge and the organization, and that does seem to help. However, if these are going to be playlists that are situated locally,
so what's an example of that? Like
the Gap,
the
Gap, the business, that and the cultural connector video that's the front of that playlist. There's something about the guy with the bright orange hat that's really attractive to a lot of teens. Plus, Reggie is very compelling when he's talking about his own lived experience, and so the combination of that with the Gap branding seems to get their attention.
Uh-huh. You say that like I know about it, and I should, but I
don't. Yeah. So one of the things
go ahead.
One of the things that we do in our national level playlist, and that really just means a playlist that goes across all of the cities because it doesn't have to be contextualized within a city necessarily. It can be. You can take it and make it local, but you don't have to. Our cultural connector videos. And really what that means is it's an example of someone who embodies some of the characteristics of the playlist. So someone, in this case, who had actually gone from passion to purpose and talks about their career trajectory or their career pathway and how they went from where they were to where they are. kind of tells their story and helps youth put a face to a path.
Which is similar to the persona work that we're thinking about. But go ahead, yeah.
Well, I mean, I do think that's kind of interesting, and I'm kind of curious if this connection, the piece you were talking about before with Chris, Paul, about connections and community connections, like that's another way, and the way they've designed these is another way to show like what's possible. So when Chris was saying like with portraits, actually some of my kids have gotten work and been, you know, like that there's possible things that could be shared there. And I was wondering if Trixie also, because it sounds like you guys were deliberately reaching out to community too in your playlist, right?
Yeah, thinking about the partnerships and where the value would be in these badges for the students as this kind of motivator that you were talking about for extracurricular work and where they could see it going. And then also its value in connection to the university. So that was one of the things I was wondering about earlier, was about how they might use these in terms of college applications and scholarship applications and these types of things that have some currency for them outside of grades. Because I think that is a place to kind of enter in and help them show value besides their interest. I mean, you know, that's always a tension. What is it they really want to learn, and how can we help them learn just for learning's sake? But also, how do we help them see why learning is important and where it goes, where it can take them?
Well, I wanted to ask Kylie what the name of this thing was again, because it's like cultural connector, which actually is like more like a person, less like a path, which is kind of interesting too.
Well, it's a person who embodies the pathway to me. So I was thinking about Chris's example where he has teens who've taken their skills and turned them into, you know, jobs, income. I have several kids that I know who've done something similar with photography, actually. They would make a really interesting case. You could interview the teen, you could make a video around them talking about their experiences, maybe shoot them like practicing their photography, showing how they've learned those skills and how they got to actually use them as part of, you know, an income source. So
not to make it bigger, Chris.
No pressure. I was just saying that would be no,
but that's what I was hearing too. Yeah,
there's a lot of examples and compelling stories that they could tell. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask, because I'm also on the National Writing Project Pathways to Leadership team, and we're designing a set of social practices that possibly may be badged out as different pathways to leadership. And it's a sticky subject in the network. You know, we've heard criticism around, we're standardizing what it means to be an NWP leader. You're making leadership into a commodity, parsing it out, marking the haves and the have-nots. And so we've gotten a lot of criticism around the idea of badging in communities of practice. And I don't see that with my students. I don't see that with young people, but I'm wondering what you all see with young people and the teachers you're working with.
You don't see them pushing back against the badges, though? I mean,
the young people, my students.
Yeah.
No, there's sometimes some apathy. Yeah, not all students are totally excited about them, but I don't get the kind of pushback that we seem to be getting in the network, in the NWP network.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, some of the answer, I don't know. There aren't answers here, but some of the discussion would be around what you've brought up in your article about how it's about conversation around the making of the badge, right? And once it's made, about what it means. So it's not, it's not digitally frozen in some way.
Right.
But yeah. But then, yeah. Or again, for them to be meaningful and open for that dialogue, they need to be bigger habits of mind that people, whether they're adults or young people, are working on. And I think there needs to be even more dialogue and more co-design on those badges. ones can happen really fast and be clear and, okay, you learned how to work an aperture, you learned this and this and this. But then, you know, you did that with night photography, you did that with this, and now, you know, what's the habit of mind that you've developed out of this? Right? I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah,
I mean,
it makes
and
total sense to me. But,
okay.
but I'm just wondering.
Is that where LRNG is going with the separate badges, do you think? Kylie? Sorry. So what I worried about when you described it, though, is it sounded like those are going to be established sort of habits, and and it seems to me, I mean, it's kind of paradoxical, but the bigger the idea is that the badge represents, the more negotiation and co-design there needs to be. Right?
Yeah, I would
That's
agree
how
with
I
that.
feel.
I think too that the bigger the idea is, it seems to me there has to be more pathways to it.
Mm-hmm.
I can understand with a kind of technical skill that there's a thing that you need to master, but with some of these other things, it seems like there have to be multiple pathways to the badge. There have to be multiple ways to show that this works, like Stephanie's students who are negotiating about how they showed this particular habit and pulling things out of other places and other classes or other public writing and that kind of stuff to show that they were meeting a particular need. I think there have not just negotiating in the moment of how this meets the criteria, but actually the criteria having different pathways, or just, you know, the criteria being about different types of indicators. And you wouldn't meet all the indicators. You would have to have some of those indicators to show that you got there, because we can't all get to the same place the same way because we're not coming from the same place.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that sometimes it's also the design challenge. Like, you actually don't know what the places people are going to come from. You know, you just can't know that. So that challenge itself of like open space where pathways can be formed is hard, is complex. I mean, I do think that there's something about Stephanie's, like the ecologies that you're developing that helps that emerge. You know, it's a bit more emergent, right? Mm-hmm.
So did
I get to
anybody
design those pieces? Sorry.
If some of the team who's working on this listens to this, do they have a clear idea what the badge should look like yet? I mean,
Aesthetically?
Trixie,
No.
I don't mean aesthetically necessarily. No, but I do mean, but they are you know, they are meaningful visual documents, right? I think it's, bye, Chris, if you had to go. It's cool. So Trixie, when you mentioned that maybe some of the opportunities would be to be part of a college application, maybe the badge should have MSU on it, right? I don't know. I
mean, that's possible, but not all. Surprisingly, not all of the kids in our area want to go to MSU.
Really? How could that be? Yeah. So, okay, fair enough. So we have to think about that more. And Kylie, if you can help us think about that, that'd be. I hear what you're saying about us being a large umbrella, and I don't think this is just a trivial what should be on the badge. I think there's something underneath this question that's interesting about how it's, you know, yeah, it's about who gives the badge and what account. So that's my last question. We're kind of up to the hour. Any last thoughts or questions that any of you have?
I have a question about how badges might add up, what they might build to or towards.
What's clear, we can't just have one kind of badge, right? We need a hierarchy of some sort.
Yeah.
And we haven't really, there isn't really a place to build that right now necessarily. I mean, I guess we could, yeah, but we they're all sort of on the same level at this point, right?
Yeah, we are talking about building unlocking like strategies so that, you know, one playlist can lead to the next. So you have to complete the first one before you can unlock the next one. So that way they could be scaffolded.
Yeah.
I mean, there's also something interesting to think about, like a meta series of like playlists or XPs where you kind of say, hey, I want you to do this group of work. How you get through that work, I don't really care, but these are the things I want you to go through and learn. So yeah, I think we have a lot to talk about and learn from as you all work through these things, honestly. I'm not sure we're going to have all the answers. I really see you guys as like collaborative thought partners and working through some of these bigger issues around badging and assessment and really what it means to create good digital content.
Cool. Well, we're missing Stephanie. You have any last thoughts?
It's just such a rich conversation. There's so much to talk about and so much potential and so many ways to approach badging design and the curricular aspects and the assessment aspects. And I'm really fortunate to be part of the NWP LRNG DML community to be able to have these conversations and to think through some of those things. So I just want to say thanks. I appreciate talking with you guys and then going back to my context and thinking through locally and then bringing that back to the network, and that back and forth is awesome.
Cool. Well, thank you and thank you the others here. And Jo, we couldn't get her sound working, but thank you, Jo. I think she's somewhere in the background. Thank you all. We're here on Teacher Teaching Teachers most every Wednesday at edtechtalk.com/TTT, part of the World Bridges Network that Jeff Lebo and Dave Cormier set up even more years ago than Youth Voices was set up. Anyway, thank you all.
Thank you.
And
Thanks, Paul.
we'll see you around.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks. Good night, everyone.
Night.
Good night.